I knew something was wrong before I even turned off the truck. The road to my ranch used to be dirt, uneven, familiar, home. Now it was smooth asphalt, lined with decorative street lamps and identical mailboxes. Then I saw the sign. Silver Creek Estates, private gated community. I thought I'd taken the wrong turn after 8 months overseas. But the oak tree was still there, the one my grandfather planted the year he finally bought this land in the 1960s, back when nobody wanted to sell to a black man in this county. Except now, there was a guard booth sitting beside it. I drove forward anyway. The gate arm slammed down in front of my hood. A security guard walked up, hand resting on his radio. "Sir, residents only." I stared past him. Where my barn used to stand, there was a clubhouse. Where my horses ran, there was a playground. Families walked dogs across land my family had owned for nearly a century. "I live here," I said quietly. He frowned. "No, you don't." 5 minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser pulled up behind me. And that was the moment my world tilted, because the officer looked at my ID, looked at the property address, then told me I was trespassing. They had built an entire luxury neighborhood on my ranch. And according to the paperwork, I didn't own it anymore. Before we go any further, tell me, what would you do if you came home and strangers were living on your land? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you believe nobody should lose their property while serving their country, subscribe, because this story only gets more unbelievable from here. The ranch wasn't just land. It was proof my family had survived a place that once tried to erase us. My grandfather bought those 42 acres in 1964 after 3 banks turned him down and one seller changed his mind the moment he saw who was standing on the porch. He kept the rejection letters in a cigar box, not out of anger, but as a reminder of what ownership meant. Every fence post on that property had a story. He planted pecan trees the year my mother was born. Built the barn by hand with neighbors who were told not to help him. And when I was 8 years old, he pressed a handful of soil into my palm and said, "Land is the only thing nobody can take if you never let go." I believed him. Before my last deployment, life there was quiet. My wife handled the books for our small cattle operation, my daughter rode her first horse behind the same barn my grandfather raised, and every Sunday we visited the small fenced plot near the creek where he was buried beside my grandmother. But the county around us had changed. Subdivisions crept closer every year. HOA neighborhoods replaced pastures. Developers sent letters, offers, then bigger offers, then pressure. They wanted road access through my ranch to connect 2 highways. I refused every time. When my unit shipped out, I set things carefully. Taxes prepaid for the year. Mail forwarding submitted. Limited power of attorney to my cousin for emergencies only. While overseas, my wife mentioned certified letters arriving from a property management company, lots of legal language, nothing urgent. We assumed it was another purchase attempt. I didn't know those envelopes would become the weapon used to erase my name from my own land, until I came home to a locked gate and a stranger calling me a trespasser. The morning after the sheriff told me to leave, I went straight to the HOA office. It sat exactly where my hayfield used to begin, a glass building with stone columns and a fountain shaped like a horse that had never seen mud in its life. Inside, everything smelled like fresh paint and expensive coffee. The receptionist smiled politely until I gave my address. Her expression changed. 10 minutes later I was sitting across from 3 people in a conference room. The HOA president, a sharply dressed developer representative, and their attorney. A folder slid across the table toward me. Inside were documents stamped, notarized, and terrifyingly official. They claimed the county had processed a lien foreclosure against my property for unpaid assessments tied to a community infrastructure agreement. According to them, my land had been annexed into a development district while I was deployed. Notices were mailed. No response was recorded. The property was legally seized and transferred to the developer. I put my deployment orders on the table. Active duty dates. Overseas location. Federal protections. The lawyer barely glanced at them. He said, calm and rehearsed, "Sir, the process followed statutory procedure. You had an opportunity to contest." Opportunity. I asked how I could contest something while sleeping in a sandstorm halfway across the world. No one answered directly. Instead, the developer opened a large color map. My ranch, the place I learned to ride, to work, to bury my grandparents, was divided into 48 numbered residential lots. Most marked sold. Families were already living in houses built over my pasture. The HOA president leaned forward and spoke softer now, almost sympathetic. "You can't undo this. But we're willing to offer a goodwill settlement so everyone can move on." The number he wrote down wasn't even enough to buy a single home inside the neighborhood built on my land. I walked out holding the folder, realizing something far worse than a dispute had happened. They weren't negotiating. They believed it was already over. I hired the only real estate attorney in the county who didn't immediately refuse my call. He read the documents twice, then leaned back in his chair without speaking. That silence said more than anything else. Finally, he told me the truth. "This isn't a paperwork mistake. This is a machine. Developer, HOA, county approvals, all tied together. Fighting them could take years, and you might lose everything trying." But I filed a dispute anyway. 2 days later, the pressure started. An overnight envelope arrived, not from the developer, but from the HOA. They were fining me for property violations. Unauthorized entry into a gated community. Interfering with residents. Damage to landscaping near the entrance. They were charging me for stepping onto my own soil. Then came the bank notice. Because of the foreclosure record, my agricultural credit line was frozen. Feed supplier cut deliveries. Our cattle operation stalled within a week. My wife tried to stay calm, but I could see the fear. Legal bills were growing. Income was stopping. A few neighbors from surrounding properties suddenly avoided eye contact. One finally admitted why. HOA representatives had been telling residents I was a disgruntled former owner trying to extort money. Online, it got worse. A community Facebook page posted a picture of me at the gate with the caption, "Man harassing homeowners after losing land dispute." Hundreds of comments followed. People I'd never met calling me a scammer. Then the county mailed a notice. A zoning board hearing had approved the development district months earlier, during the exact weeks my unit was operating overseas. I never received the hearing notice. But legally, they said I had been properly informed. That evening I drove to the property line again. From outside the iron fence, I could see the small hill near the creek, where my grandparents were buried. Now it sat inside a landscaped park with a walking path looping around it. A security patrol slowly rolled past me, waiting for me to leave. And for the first time since coming home, I wondered if they were going to succeed in making me give up. Sleep stopped coming easy after that. Every time I closed my eyes, the sounds overlapped, not gunfire this time, but machinery. Bulldozers grinding through dirt sounded too much like armored tracks rolling over gravel. Backup alarms became distant warning sirens. I'd wake up reaching for a rifle that wasn't there, only to see the ceiling of a house we might soon lose. My daughter asked one night why I kept checking the windows. I told her it was habit. The truth was different. I'd spent months overseas protecting places that weren't mine, yet I couldn't protect the one thing that was. Bills stacked on the kitchen table beside legal paperwork. My wife tried to hide the calculator whenever I walked in, but I saw the numbers shrinking. College savings paused. Feed accounts overdue. The ranch, the center of our life, already gone on paper. Friends called with advice meant kindly. Take the settlement. Start fresh somewhere else. You served your country. Don't destroy yourself fighting this. Maybe they were right. One evening I opened my grandfather's old cedar chest, looking for the original deed to copy for my lawyer. Under folded church programs and faded photos was his Bible, the one he carried in his truck every day. When I lifted it, something slipped out. An aged survey map, hand-marked in pencil. Boundary lines darker than the official county copies I had seen. Notes in his handwriting referencing an older property description, one that didn't match the subdivision plats. I stared at it for a long time. For the first time since the gate closed in front of me, I didn't feel defeated. I felt quiet. And quiet meant I was ready to fight properly. The HOA announced a community town hall to clear up misinformation. My name wasn't on the schedule, but the meeting was about me, so I went. The clubhouse stood where my hayfield used to start. Bright lights, folding chairs, bottled water tables, and a security guard at the door who watched me longer than anyone else walking in. Conversations lowered as I passed. Some people recognized me from social media. Others just saw the man they'd been warned about. At the front of the room sat the HOA board, the developer, and their attorney. A projector hummed to life behind them. The first slide read, Silver Creek Estates, Legal Development Timeline. They told a clean story. Unclaimed land. Certified notices mailed. County approval granted. Foreclosure processed. Homes legally built. Then my picture appeared on the screen, the photo taken of me at the gate. Under it, former claimant disputing lawful proceedings. Murmurs filled the room. The HOA president spoke calmly, reassuring residents they had nothing to worry about. He described me as someone attempting to profit after the fact. That was the moment I stepped forward. I never sold that land. The room fell completely quiet. I held up my deployment orders and explained where I had been during every notice they claimed to send. A few residents shifted uncomfortably. But the developer's attorney immediately cut in, speaking louder than me, repeating legal phrases, statutory procedure, proper posting, lawful transfer. He wasn't arguing with me. He was calming the homeowners. Then a woman near the front stood up holding the brochure she received when she bought her house. On the cover was a picture of my barn and pasture labeled Preserved Historic Ranch Views. People started flipping through their packets. You could hear pages turning across the room. The HOA president quickly tried to move to the next slide, but questions were already rising. Was the original owner contacted? Are our homes safe? Why did the brochure say preserved land? The developer's tone hardened. Marketing language, he said, wasn't legally binding. Everything had been approved. No one was losing their house. Security moved closer to me. That's when 2 reporters walked in with cameras. The room changed instantly. Phones came out. People recorded openly now. A resident approached me quietly and asked if they really built the neighborhood while I was overseas. I told her yes. Her expression shifted from defensive to uneasy. My lawyer then spoke up and announced we were filing a motion to halt further construction until ownership was resolved. Gasps spread across the room. The HOA president accused me of threatening family stability. I answered as calmly as I could. I didn't want anyone's home, only acknowledgement of my land. Some people clapped. Others shouted back. The meeting fractured into sides. One man yelled that I was trying to make residents homeless. I told him I wasn't taking houses, I was asking how they got there in the first place. Someone filmed the exchange. Within hours it was everywhere online, but this time the comments weren't one-sided anymore. Later that week I stood outside the iron fence again with my daughter beside me. Inside, children played on a bright new playground sitting exactly where my horse corral used to be. She asked if they knew they were playing in our yard. I didn't have an answer. That's when 2 HOA board members approached with a patrol officer. In front of watching residents and recording phones, they handed me a written trespass warning. No one cheered. No one laughed. People just watched quietly, like doubt had finally reached them. That night the neighborhood split apart online, half defending the HOA, half demanding explanations. The news aired both sides. For the first time, I wasn't the crazy former owner. I was a question mark. Late that evening my lawyer called. He had studied the old survey map my grandfather kept and found something that didn't match county records. He told me to meet him at the archives in the morning. Because if he was right, they hadn't just taken my ranch. They might have taken the wrong land entirely. The next morning the county records archive smelled like dust and old paper, the kind of place nobody visits unless something has gone very wrong. My lawyer didn't speak much as we pulled plat books from metal shelves. Page after page of survey grids, parcel numbers, revisions stacked over decades. Most of it meant nothing to me until he stopped turning pages. He laid my grandfather's hand-marked survey beside the county subdivision plat. At first they looked identical. Then he pointed to a single line, a boundary running along the creek. The subdivision map curved slightly inward. My grandfather's line ran straight. It was only a few feet on paper. But in real land, it was everything. He pulled another document, the original agricultural deed description written long before digital records. The coordinates matched my grandfather's map, not the developer's filing. The parcel ID used in the foreclosure didn't match my primary deed. They had foreclosed on a neighboring tract number that had been merged incorrectly during zoning. My ranch, legally, had never transferred. I felt relief for about half a second before the weight of it hit. 48 houses were already standing on land that technically still belonged to me. My lawyer leaned back, eyes fixed on the documents. They didn't just rush paperwork, he said quietly. They built an entire neighborhood without owning the ground under it. Outside the archive windows, traffic moved like nothing had changed. But inside that room, the fight shifted. This wasn't about getting my land back anymore. This was about what happens when a corporation builds a luxury community on property it never legally acquired. Finding out the subdivision sat on land never legally transferred should have ended the fight. It didn't. Because the moment my attorney filed notice of the parcel error, the resistance changed. The developer stopped trying to settle cheaply. Instead, they escalated, fast and quiet. New lawyers appeared on filings. Motions stacked up overnight. They weren't acting like someone who made a mistake. They were acting like someone trying to bury one. My attorney started digging deeper, past the foreclosure paperwork and into the timeline that happened while I was deployed. What he found came in layers, each worse than the last. He asked me for every record from my service period, orders, activation dates, housing paperwork. I didn't understand why until he placed a federal statute printout on the table. While on active duty overseas, creditors and civil actions involving property require strict verification and court protections. No default judgment. No foreclosure without additional court review. My foreclosure judgment contained no military affidavit. No court hearing verifying my status. No delay. They had processed the seizure as if I were a civilian who never responded, even though my deployment was public federal record. My lawyer didn't smile, but his tone changed. This alone can void everything. We subpoenaed the mailing records. The certified notice receipts showed signatures, but not mine, not my wife's, not my cousin's. The name written was barely legible, just initials. The delivery address line contained a minor but critical alteration. The rural route box number changed by 1 digit. Every notice legally served had been routed somewhere else. Not returned. Not corrected. Just accepted as valid. Someone had needed proof I'd been notified, not proof I actually was. The zoning board meeting approving the development district happened during the same month. Attendance logs listed surrounding landowners notified and present, including me. But I was thousands of miles away. Video archives from the county meeting showed public comments, and a man speaking under my name for the record. The camera never showed his face clearly, only a silhouette at the podium agreeing to road access. My attorney paused the footage. That wasn't an error. That was impersonation entered into government record. The parcel numbering error bothered my lawyer the most. County systems don't randomly swap core deed identifiers during foreclosure unless someone overrides them. We requested internal revision logs. At first the county claimed none existed. Then they found a partial export. One clerk ID appeared repeatedly, adjusting parcel boundaries weeks before the foreclosure filing. The same clerk later certified the corrected map used by the developer. Cross-checking revealed the clerk had resigned shortly after construction began, and 2 months later was hired by a land consulting firm tied to the developer's parent company. Now the mistake had motive. The developer carried construction liability insurance covering title disputes, but only for unintentional defects. Fraud voids coverage. My attorney explained what that meant. Without insurance, every home sale, every mortgage, every contract shifted financial responsibility directly onto the developer and HOA board members personally. Not thousands. Not hundreds of thousands. Millions. The case was no longer about whether I could afford to fight them. It was about whether they could survive losing. Their settlement offer arrived the next morning, 10 times higher than before. My attorney didn't counter. He rejected it outright. Because now we weren't negotiating ownership. We were preparing damages. Wrongful foreclosure. Federal service violations. Fraudulent notice. Government record falsification. Unjust enrichment. Each claim stacked liability higher. I went back to the fence at dusk, standing across from the small hill where my grandparents were buried inside the landscaped park. Sprinklers ran across grass planted over pasture I once worked every morning before school. For weeks I'd felt like I was trying to recover something already taken. Now I understood, the land had never left. They had just built an illusion on top of it. I rested my hand on the iron bars and made a quiet promise that this wouldn't end with a check and a confidentiality agreement. My grandfather didn't fight to own that soil so someone could erase his name with paperwork. The fight wasn't about possession anymore. It was about record. The courtroom wouldn't be deciding whether I used to own the ranch. It would decide whether an entire luxury community had been created through coordinated fraud while its owner served overseas. And if the judge agreed, the consequences wouldn't just restore my land. They would expose everyone who helped take it. The courthouse was already crowded when we arrived. News vans lined the street. Cameras pointed toward the entrance. What started as a property dispute had turned into something bigger, a case about a deployed service member, a development company, and a neighborhood built on the wrong land. Inside the courtroom every seat was filled. Residents sat on one side, reporters along the back wall, and the HOA board clustered near their attorneys. No one looked confident anymore. The judge entered, calm but stern, and immediately addressed the nature of the case. His tone made it clear this wasn't routine civil litigation. He wanted direct answers. My attorney began with the simplest point, ownership. A large screen displayed 2 maps, the developer's subdivision plat and the original agricultural deed survey. At first they looked identical, until he zoomed into the creek boundary. The courtroom leaned forward as the lines separated. The parcel foreclosed was not the parcel my deed described. The judge removed his glasses and steadied the screen longer than anyone else had so far. Then came the military records. My deployment orders were entered into evidence, along with federal requirements for foreclosure actions involving active duty service members. The courtroom grew quieter as the judge flipped through the paperwork. No military status affidavit. No additional hearing. No delay granted. The defense attorney tried to argue procedural compliance, but the judge interrupted, asking directly whether the court had ever been informed I was deployed overseas. There was no clear answer. Next came the mail records. Certified notices were shown with signatures that didn't match anyone connected to my household. The address digit error was highlighted. My attorney asked a simple question: if the notice never reached the owner, how could the owner respond? The defense objected repeatedly. The judge overruled most of them. Then the zoning meeting footage played. The courtroom watched a man stand at a podium under my name approving development access while I was deployed thousands of miles away. The video paused. Silence held the room. The judge leaned forward and asked the defense if they could identify the speaker. They could not. The tension changed. Up until then the defense argued legality. Now they were defending legitimacy. The county clerk records followed. Internal parcel revisions, timestamps, and employment records showing the same clerk later hired by a company connected to the developer. The defense attorneys began whispering urgently among themselves. Halfway through testimony, another shift happened. An insurance representative, previously seated quietly behind the defense, requested permission to address the court. He stated their company was reviewing coverage due to potential fraudulent conduct exclusions. The HOA president visibly paled. Without insurance backing, liability moved directly onto the developer and the board members personally. My attorney didn't raise his voice. He simply summarized. A foreclosure processed without required service member protections. Notice sent to an altered address. A public hearing attended by an impersonator. Parcel records adjusted before seizure. Construction begun before lawful ownership. The judge called for a recess. When court resumed, his tone was no longer neutral. He spoke slowly, carefully, making sure every word entered the record. The foreclosure was declared void from the beginning. The title transfer invalid. The development constructed without lawful ownership. Gasps spread across the room. Some residents covered their mouths. The HOA board sat frozen. But the judge continued. Residents who purchased homes in good faith would not lose them immediately. Their interests would be protected under equitable relief. Financial responsibility, however, would fall upon the parties responsible for the unlawful development. Damages, legal fees, and further proceedings for fraud referral were ordered. The developer's attorney lowered his head. The HOA president stared forward without blinking. For months I'd stood outside a gate being told I didn't belong on my own land. Now the court record said the opposite. They hadn't built a neighborhood I lost. They built a neighborhood they never had the right to build at all. The fence came down 3 weeks later. Not all of it, just the section around the hill by the creek. The residents voted to keep it open after the ruling, and for the first time since I came home, I walked to my grandparents' graves without someone watching me like I didn't belong there. The houses stayed. The court worked out a long-term land lease so families wouldn't lose their homes overnight, but the developer, not the residents, carried the cost. A brass plaque was placed near the walking path explaining what the land had been long before sidewalks and streetlights. My daughter read it twice, then looked up at me and said, "So they know now." They did. The county issued a formal apology, and the HOA board quietly dissolved not long after the financial judgment finalized. College savings went back into the account. The ranch name went back on the records where it had always been. I stood at the hill one last evening, wind moving through grass that finally felt familiar again. They built a neighborhood on my ranch. But they couldn't erase who it belonged to, or the story rooted in the soil beneath it.